Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Guy in Ohio, Melissa in Great Neck, Nancy, North Carolina, Belle in Texas, Renee, Indiana, Bill in Missouri, Sharon in New Jersey, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Venice, Frank in San Pedro, Aoife in Florida, Debbie in New Jersey, Lester in Florida, Moishi in Brooklyn, and Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Durian Songbird in memory of his father who died just a couple of days ago, Warren. May Warren's memory always be for a blessing. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And tonight's episode in his honor, may it lift him up even just a little bit higher in the world of souls. And Durian, may you be comforted at this difficult time. We're with you. And in the merit of enabling us to share more Torah with the world, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say Amen. Okay, our daf tonight is page 49, but we're actually still pretty close to the top of page 48b. And we're in chapter 5, still discussing Mishna number 1, which gets back a little bit to I wouldn't say the basics. Again, these offerings that were brought when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, we're not really talking about who brings an offering and why he brings an offering, from the point of view of the owner, but rather how the offerings themselves are brought in the Holy Temple by the priests. And to that extent, it's a little bit more going back to the basics. Here in chapter 5, we'll be talking about all the offerings, and the order in which they're discussed is from the most sacred to less sacred. And so we started by talking about the bull and the goats of Yom Kippur, the bulls and the goats that are burned for communal for communal offering, when the congregation erred, relying on a ruling of the Sanhedrin, or a ruling of the king, or a ruling of the high priest. Okay, having derived from these verses that we talked about yesterday, that all sin offerings are disqualified if they are not slaughtered in the north, right? As we talked about yesterday, the north in the Holy Temple, right? This is the Mizbeach, the altar, that's in the south of this courtyard in front of the sanctuary. And so this area, It's just backwards for me. So this area up here, and you can see there's kind of those little rings, those curved lines in the floor. Those are kind of rings to which animals would be tied when they would be slaughtered in the north. That is the north. Up here is the north of the temple courtyard. This is west. This is east. Okay. So the point is that offerings of the highest sanctity, like sin offerings, have to be slaughtered in the north, in that portion of the courtyard. Okay, so they're disqualified if they are not slaughtered in the north. Now the Gemara questions part of this explanation. So rather, why do I need the term it stated with regard to the particular sin offering of a king in the verse, and he shall place his hand upon the head of the goat and slaughter it in the place where they slaughtered the burnt offering before the Lord? It is a sin offering in Leviticus 4:24. Excuse me. So the Gemara answers, it is required for that which is taught in a baraisa. It, the goat sin offering of a king, is slaughtered in the north of the tabernacle. But the goat offered by Nachshon was not slaughtered in the north. What's the goat brought by Nachshon? Now we're talking about when the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the original holy temple, which was portable, the first time when God instructed the children of Israel, having come out of slavery in Egypt, received the Torah at Mount Sinai, and then they built the portable tabernacle, which contained this courtyard and this area north of the altar where the slaughtering would be done for sin offerings, burnt offerings, etc. But when it was originally inaugurated, right, and there was a 12-day inauguration when each tribe brought all manner of animals for offerings, Nachshon was the... What is going on? Stop. Find my iPhone alert. I don't know who is doing that. It's my phone. Sorry about that. So Nachshon was the Nasi, the prince of Yehuda, the tribe of Judah. Right. So what they're saying is when the offerings were brought originally, which some of them were characterized as sin offerings, but they didn't have to be slaughtered in the north, are we going to learn something from that for all future generations? Or are we going to say, well, that was just the inaugural offerings, the inauguration offerings of the Mishkan in the desert? That was a one-time thing. Why do we need to learn something from that about where we slaughter in the future? It is required for that which is taught in the Baraisa. The goat sin offering of a king, is slaughtered in the north of the tabernacle, but the goat of Nachshon and the other princes was not slaughtered in the north. Nachshon was the prince of the tribe of Judah. He, along with all the other princes of the tribes, brought offerings to inaugurate the altar and the tabernacle as recorded in the Torah in Numbers chapter 7. Although the offerings were classified as sin offerings because they shared some characteristics of sin offerings, they were not brought to atone for any particular sin like other sin offerings. Therefore, the term it teaches that the offerings of the princes did not require slaughter in the north. The Torah was actually signaling to us that we were talking about actual sin offerings as opposed to the offerings of the tribes at the inauguration. And the reason that it is necessary for the Torah to exclude the sin offering of Nachshon and the other princes from the requirement of slaughter in the north is because it is taught in a baraisa. The verse states, with regard to the sin offering of a king, and he shall place his hand upon the head of the goat and slaughter it in the place where they slaughtered the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. The verse could have stated upon its head. The reason it adds of the goat, right? We already know he's talking about that goat. Why does it say again of the goat? Is to include the goat brought as a sin offering by Nachshon in the requirement of smicha, placing hands on the head of the offering, but not the requirement to slaughter it in the north. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says the term of the goat serves to include the goats brought as sin offerings for communal idol worship in the requirement of semicha. So the Gemara explains, it might enter your mind to say that since the sin offerings of the princes are included in the requirement of placing hands, they are also included in the requirement of being slaughtered in the north of the courtyard. Therefore, the term it teaches us that for the goat brought as a sin offering by Nachshon and the other princes, there was no requirement of slaughter in the north. Now, Ravina objects to this interpretation. This works out well, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the offering of Nachshon required him to place his hands on the head of the animal. But according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, what is there to say? Why should the Torah write the term it, since there is no reason to assume that it would require slaughter in the north? Mar Zutra, the son of Rav Tavi, said to Ravina, and according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, does it work out well, in fact? Why is it necessary for the Torah to specifically exclude the offerings of the princes from the requirement of slaughter in the north? Why not say that for that which it was included, placing hands on the head of the animal, it was included, and for that which it was not included, i.e. slaughter in the north, it was not included? And if you would say that if the verse had not excluded the offerings of the princes, then I would say that one could derive the requirement for slaughter in the north via a paradigm from all other sin offerings. Well, if so, one could also derive the requirement for semicha, placing hands on the head of the animal itself via the same paradigm. So this analysis breaks down. Therefore, the reason that the requirement of placing hands cannot be derived via this paradigm is that we do not learn the requirements of the sin offering of Nachshon, which was only for the time of the inauguration of the tabernacle, from the requirement of sin offerings applicable to all generations. So too, the requirement of slaughter in the north cannot be derived via a paradigm because we do not learn the requirements of the sin offering of Nachshon from the requirement of sin offerings applicable to all generations. I mean, it's interesting. You might think that what we've been saying is we're not going to learn out from the offering that was brought once by the princes at the inauguration of the Mishkan in the desert, laws that we're going to apply to the sin offerings of all other generations. You might have thought that. But what we're actually saying here is that we're not going to learn out from the rules of bringing offerings for all future generations what the law was when Nachshon brought his offering. You might say, why would we even think to learn it that way? When Nachshon brought his offering, Moses, was right there supervising, and Moshe was in direct contact with God, taking, instruction about how they would do everything that they were doing in the Mishkan. Why would we need to derive laws about what the halachas were of bringing an offering at that one-time event in the presence of God and Moses in the wilderness? Answer, because it's Torah, and we must learn it. And, if it's not explicitly stated exactly how the inauguration was done, then we're going to fill in, the needed requirements. Why? Because perhaps when Mashiach comes and the third temple goes up and we're going to inaugurate it, we're going to have to know the halachas of inaugurating a new temple, and we'll learn it out from that example. And you might say, well, then Mashiach will be there to supervise and he'll be in direct contact with Hashem. And maybe so. But maybe Hashem and Mashiach will say to us, okay, well, what have you derived? Well done. You got it right or you got it wrong. I don't know. But we're not going to desist from filling in a missing law from the fact that it only happened once in history, even though it was in the presence of God and Moshe. Rather, the term it that was stated with regard to the sin offering of a king serves to teach that it must be slaughtered in the north of the temple courtyard, but the one who slaughters it does not need to stand in the north when he slaughters it, which we were talking about yesterday. Now, the Gemara challenges this. The law of the one who slaughters the offering has already been derived from the statement of Rabbi Achia, As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Achia says, the verse states with regard to the burnt offering, and he shall slaughter it on the side of the altar northward before the Lord. That's Leviticus 1:11. So why must the verse state the exclusionary term it there? All right, and he shall slaughter it on the side of the northward base of the northward before the Lord. What are we talking about, it? Because it could have just said, we're already talking about, when this kind of offering is brought, it shall be slaughtered with this, that, and the other, and he shall slaughter in the north. To say, and he shall slaughter it, you didn't need the it. From the fact that the it is there, they're gonna derive another element of the law. So he explains, since we have found that the priest stands in the north and collects the blood from the neck of the animal in the north, and if he stood in the south and collected the blood in the north, the offering would be disqualified. One might have thought that this is so also with regard to this one who slaughters the offering. Therefore, the verse states, and he shall slaughter it, to teach that it, the animal, must be in the north, but the one who slaughters it is not required to be standing in the north. He could be standing just over the line and reach over and slaughter, and it would still be valid. And therefore, the question must be addressed, what is derived from the exclusionary term it with regard to the sin offering of a king? So the Gemara explains, rather the term it, stated with regard to the sin offering of a king, serves to teach that it, a goat brought as a sin offering, must be slaughtered in the north, but a young bird offering a young bird brought as an offering does not need to be killed in the north. We don't say slaughtered because a bird is not shechted. They kill it with malika when it's brought as an offering, pinching the neck. This is as it is taught in a baraisa. One might have thought that a male bird requires pinching of the nape of the neck in the north of the temple courtyard, and this can be derived from a logical inference. Just as a young sheep brought as a burnt offering is an offering for which the Torah did not fix that its slaughter must be performed by a priest, but nevertheless fixed that its slaughter must be in the north, right? Because a slaughter does not have to be done by a priest. With regard to a young bird brought as an offering for which the Torah did require that its killing be done by a priest, malika can only be performed by a priest. Therefore, isn't it obvious that we have to apply this additional stringency that the malika has to be done in the north? We would have thought that. Therefore, the verse states it to exclude a male bird from the requirement of conducting the malika in the north. Now, the Gemara questions this logical inference. One cannot derive the law of a bird offering from the law of a sheep offering. As what is notable about a young sheep offering? It is notable in that the Torah fixed the requirement that it be slaughtered with a utensil, a knife. A bird, by contrast, is killed by the priest using his fingernail. Therefore, the term it cannot serve to counter this derivation. There are already too many differences. Yet, yes, it has to be done by a priest, but the priest is not using a knife. So we're not going to extend laws from shechting a sheep to conducting malika on a bird. It's irrelevant that a priest has to do the malika of a bird, but a non-priest can do the shechting of a sheep, since there are other differences, so we can't extend one law to the other. So the Gemara explains, so the Gemara tries again. So rather, the term it, stated with regard to the sin offering of a king, serves to teach that it, the goat of the king, is slaughtered in the north, but the Pesach is not slaughtered in the north. And now we have arrived at a law that we know to be true. Right? The Pesach, the Passover lamb or goat that was slaughtered on the afternoon before Passover, when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, and thousands of them were brought, because everybody had a Pesach, it wasn't even feasible that all of them would be slaughtered in that particular area of the Holy Temple. Was it? Let's see. As it is taught in Baraisa, the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, one might have thought that a Pesach requires slaughter in the north, and you would have derived it by logical inference. Just as a burnt offering is an offering for which the Torah did not fix a time for its slaughter, but required that it be slaughtered in the north, then with regard to a Pesach, which has the additional stringency of the Torah, that it can only be slaughtered on the afternoon before Pesach begins that night, is it not logical that the Torah would also require that it be slaughtered only in one place, the place of the holiest offerings, the north? So what do you expect? The Gemara is now going to question this logical inference. Whoa. One cannot derive the law of a Pesach from the law of a burnt offering, as it's true that the burnt offering can be done any day of the year. The Pesach has only one day a year, but the burnt offering is going to have its own stringencies that the Pesach does not have, right? One cannot derive the law of the Pesach from the law of the burnt offering, as what is notable about a burnt offering. It is notable in that the Torah teaches that it is entirely burned on the altar. That is not so with regard to the Pesach. The Pesach, it's blood gets sprinkled on the altar. Maybe some small part of it gets burnt on the altar, but most of it gets eaten by the people who brought it. That's the Pesach lamb that they eat that night, roasted. So the Gemara continues, if you would suggest a logical inference from the law of a sin offering, which is not entirely burned upon the altar, but is slaughtered only in the north, this too can be refuted. As what is notable about a sin offering? It is notable in that it atones for those sins that render one liable to punishment by charis, which is not so about the Pesach. The Pesach doesn't atone for anything. It's just a commandment that we eat the Pesach on Erev Pesach, right in the afternoon before Pesach. We eat it that night, and we slaughter in the afternoon before Pesach. We don't do this anymore because we can't slaughter the Pesach in the absence of a temple. But if we did, we would be bringing it. It would be part of the celebration and the remembrance of God bringing us out of Egypt. But it doesn't atone for a sin like a sin offering does. Therefore, you can't say that any stringency that applies to a sin offering would also apply to a Pesach. And if you would suggest that we learn out that the Pesach should be slaughtered in the north by extension from the guilt offering, which is not entirely burned, and which does not atone for those sins that are punishable by charis, death at the hands of the heavenly court when done intentionally, and which is slaughtered only in the north, well, this too can be refuted. As what is notable about a guilt offering? It is notable in that it has the status of an offering of the most sacred order, which is not so with regard to the Pesach. And the Gemara adds, having noted this distinction between a guilt offering and a Pesach, one can say that for all of the three offerings as well, the law of a Pesach cannot be derived from them, since they all have the status of offerings of the most sacred order, and the Pesach does not. So we still don't know what to learn out about the word it when we're talking about the goat sin offering of a king who made a mistaken ruling that people relied on and then sinned. So actually the term it teaches, as we initially said, it, i.e. the animal, must be standing in the north, but the one who slaughters the animal does not have to be standing in the north. And that which is difficult for you, that we derive this law from the statement of Rabbi Achia, is in fact not difficult. The derivation from the term it is not to exclude one who slaughters from the requirements to slaughter in the north, since that law is known already from the statement of Rabbi Achia. Rather, the derivation is that it is only one who slaughters the animal who does not have to stand in the north, but by inference, the one who collects the blood from the neck of the animal, he must stand in the north. And he's a priest. That we know that although the slaughter can be done by a non-priest, collecting the blood, conveying the blood, and sprinkling the blood on the altar can only be done by a priest. The Gemara questions this inference too, about that the one collecting the blood must stand in the north. The law that one who collects the blood from the neck of the animal must stand in the north is derived from the fact that the Torah could have written the priest shall take, and instead writes and the priest shall take in Leviticus 4:34, which may be read as he will take himself and he will take, right? How do you say and? And is not a separate word. In Hebrew, you just add the prefix vav, right? Velekach, and he shall take, velakach, and he shall take, but you could have read that as lo yikach. Right, yeah, as low, well, I don't know how you get the lamed in front, but that's how they explained it in the previous Amud, that the way the Hebrew works, the and he shall take could have been read as he shall take for himself. So the Gemara explains the Tana does not learn anything from this distinction between the priest shall take and the priest shall take. He does not agree with this derivation, and therefore he must derive the requirement to collect the blood while standing in the north from a different verse, and that is what we have just done. New topic. The Gemara asks, we found the source for the requirement of slaughter in the north with regard to a burnt offering in order to perform the commandment in the optimal manner. We also found the source for the requirement of collecting the blood while standing in the north in order to perform the mitzvah in the optimal manner. From where do we derive that slaughter and collection of the blood are disqualified if they are not performed in the north? Optimal manner means you're commanded to do it that way. But if you don't do it that way, it's still valid after the fact. Now we're going to derive that not only is it that you're commanded to do it that way, but in addition, if you don't do it that way, the offering is disqualified. Right? If it's not slaughtered in the north, if its blood is not collected in the north, if the guy standing and collecting the blood is not standing in the north, that's going to disqualify the offering. How do we know? Rav Ada bar Ahava says, and some say it was Rabba bar Shela who says, it is derived by kal v'chomer inference, just as the law that the slaughter and blood collection of a sin offering be performed in the north comes by virtue of a comparison to the law of a burnt offering. As the verse states, and slaughter the sin offering in the place of the burnt offering. Yet, if the animal was not slaughtered, or its blood was not collected in the north, it disqualifies the offering. With regard to the burnt offering itself, as the law that the slaughter and blood collection of sin offering be in the north comes by virtue of the law of the burnt offering, is it not logical that if it was not slaughtered or its blood was not collected in the north, this should disqualify the offering? Right? Since we're deriving from the law of the burnt offering that the sin offering has to be slaughtered in the north, its blood collected there, etc., and we know that with the sin offering, if you don't do those things, the sin offering is disqualified, then aren't we going to extend the same full disqualification back to the burnt offering? Why do you think the Gemara is going to reject that analysis? Because the sin offering in itself is more stringent than the burnt offering. What is notable about a sin offering? It is notable in that it atones for those sins that render one liable for the punishment of kares, if done intentionally. And this is not so with regard to the burnt offering. So Ravina said, this is what is difficult for Rav Ada bar Ahava. In other words, regardless of the notable characteristic of a sin offering, he is still of the opinion that his logical inference stands. Have we ever found a secondary prohibition is more stringent than a primary prohibition? If we're deriving the law of the sin offering from the law of the burnt offering, how could the law of the sin offering be more stringent than the law of the burnt offering? So Mar Zutra, the son of Rab Mari, said to Ravina, but have we not found a secondary prohibition that is more stringent than a primary one? But there is the case of meiser sheini, the second tithe, which may be redeemed, whereas food that is purchased with meiser sheini, redemption money, may not be redeemed. Now we're on page 49a. And what they're saying is, when the temple was standing in Israel, in Jerusalem, and tithing was in full force, so that all farmers, when they brought in their crop, first 2% to a priest, that they can choose which priest. Next 10% to a Levite, and they can choose which Levite. Next 10% after that is the second tithe, right? The first 2% is called teruma, consecrated. Next 10%, meiser, tithe, right? The tenth, it means tithe. Tithe means tenth. Meiser means the 10th. Second tithe, meiser sheini, the next 10th. What's that used for? In most of the years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, it's to fund your pilgrimage up to Jerusalem to bring offerings and to celebrate Passover or Shavuos or Sukkot, the festival in Jerusalem. How do you do it? You can take that crop with you and eat of it while you're in Jerusalem. For most people, that is totally impractical. So you can sell that crop, that second tithe, and convert it into money. Now that money, you set it aside. You literally set aside those coins. That's your meiser sheini fund. And what you're really supposed to do with that is go up to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem, use it to purchase the food and drink that you're going to enjoy during the festival. If you take that money and buy produce before you get to Jerusalem, that produce that you bought, and it could be an animal as well because you're planning to, barbecue it, slaughter it and barbecue it while you're up in Jerusalem, you can do that. But now that you have redeemed meiser sheini money and turned it into food, right, either produce or an animal that's going to become food, so now you cannot redeem that animal. Right? The animal that you bought with meiser sheini money, you can't repeat the process and turn it back into meiser sheini money and then again buy in Jerusalem. Once you turn meiser sheini money back into some kind of food, either produce or an animal to be used as food, you can't redeem that until you get up to Jerusalem. You can't do it outside Jerusalem. And so interestingly, that is a greater stringency on if, for example, you bought an animal with your meiser sheini money, that the original produce could be turned into money. The money that you then use to purchase an animal or produce, you can't sell again and turn back into money to take to Jerusalem. So what you bought with meiser sheini money now has a greater stringency attached to it than the original produce that you were able to redeem outside of Jerusalem and turn into meiser sheini money. Ooh. And how does that happen that you might have to change it? This has to do with tumah. Right, but there is the case of second tithe, which may be redeemed, whereas food that is purchased with second tithe money may not be redeemed. As we learned in the Mishna, tractate meiser sheini, with regard to food that was purchased with meiser sheini money and that then became tamei, this ritually impure food must be redeemed with money, which one must purchase, with which one must purchase other food. Rabbi Yehuda says the food must be buried. Okay, so what I told you is correct, but if it became impure, because it's all meiser sheini, you're going to have to turn it into money. But you're not going to be able to do that till you get up to Jerusalem. The food, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't even redeem meiser sheini money that was used to buy produce, and then the produce became tamei. He says you can't sell it into money again. So the Gemara infers from the Mishnah, if the food purchased with second tithe money became impure, yes, it may be redeemed. But if it did not become impure, it may not be redeemed. If so, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the law that food purchased with second tithe money must be buried if it becomes impure is more stringent than the law for second tithe produce itself, which may be redeemed if it becomes impure. Now the Gemara answers there, the reason one may not redeem food that was purchased with meiser sheini, money, and that then became tamei, is not that the law is more stringent. Rather, there is a different reason. Since this food was merely purchased with second tithe money, its sanctity is not as strong as the tithe itself, and is unable to grasp, is not as strong as the tithe itself. Okay. And the sanctity of this food that was bought with meiser sheini money, is unable to grasp its redemption money. What does this mean? Its status as second tithe is weak, and it cannot be transferred to a third item. Consequently, if it becomes impure, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it cannot be redeemed for money, but it must be buried as an item that one is prohibited to derive benefit from, and which it's not possible to redeem. I just want to mention in passing, because I should have said at the top of the class, there's no class tomorrow, Friday, nor Saturday, nor Sunday. We'll be in Phoenix speaking at Sharei Shalom Synagogue on Shabbos. I'm not sure if we're speaking Friday night or Saturday morning. I think Saturday morning. Also Saturday night, there's a Malava Malka at Sharei Shalom in Phoenix. And then Sunday evening, there's a screening of a Guns N' Moses, co-sponsored with Stand With Us, and I think Maganam in Phoenix. And then we're flying back Monday. And so then the next class after today will be on Monday. And Nina, let's make sure we put that schedule on the Facebook page. Okay. Marzutra asks, now, we're trying to show that something that derives its status, its secondary status from something that is primary, the secondary item cannot have laws associated with it that are more stringent than the laws associated with the primary item from which the secondary item derived its status, its sacred status. So Marzutra says, but there's the case of the temura. Right? So the general temura law is if I consecrated this sheep, and I said, I'm going to bring this sheep as an offering the next time I go up to Jerusalem. So now that sheep is consecrated. And then later, if I change my mind and say, oh, I didn't mean to consecrate that sheep. I was going to use that sheep for a special dinner party that we have coming up. So instead, I'm going to substitute this other black sheep for this white sheep. Can't do that. That's prohibited. So if I violate that prohibition and attempt to substitute the black sheep for the white sheep remains consecrated, and now the black sheep also becomes consecrated. Right? That's the general law of temura. The word temura means substitution. So now Marzutra says, but there is the case of temura, as the status of an offering does not take effect with regard to a permanently blemished animal, while consecration performed via substitution does take effect with regard to an animal with a permanent blemish. What they're saying here is, if the white sheep was originally, before I consecrated it, blemished in a way that would prohibit it being brought as an offering on the altar, then when I attempted to consecrate it, that consecration would not take hold. It's only when it develops a blemish later that it remains consecrated. I have to deal with the blemish. But if I have this white sheep that's consecrated, and then I say, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Instead, I want to substitute this black sheep for the white sheep. Then even if the black sheep already has a permanent blemish such that it couldn't be brought on the altar, now this attempted substitution creates consecration even though it's blemished and it can't be brought on the altar. It is consecrated. I can't bring it as an offering, but I'm going to have to deal with it. Put it out to pasture, let it die. There is substitution, not this kind of substitution, but other kinds of substitution available in certain cases. I'm going to have to deal with the fact that even though it can't be brought as an offering on the altar, it will remain consecrated. But there is the case of temura, as the status of an offering does not take effect with regard to a permanently blemished animal, but consecration performed via temura does take effect with regard to an animal with a permanent blemish. Although the animal cannot be sacrificed as an offering and it must be redeemed, even after its redemption, it may not be used for labor and its wool may not be used. So the black sheep that had a permanent blemish before I attempted to consecrate it as a substitution will remain consecrated. I can't bring it as an offering. I'm going to have to redeem it, right? So get the money to buy yet another offering that can be brought. And the black sheep is also going to remain unavailable to be worked by me or shorn by me. So therefore, it looks like even though the black sheep is deriving its sacred status from the attempt to substitute it for the white sheep, it is going to have a stringency associated with it that would not be associated with the white sheep. Secondary item, with derivative sacred status, is going to have a greater stringency than the primary item, which we said doesn't happen. So this would seem to be a counterexample. And the Gemara answers, the sanctity of a temura comes by virtue of a consecrated animal. Therefore, it has a stronger sanctity. But the sanctity of a consecrated animal itself comes by virtue of a non-sacred animal, as there was no consecrated animal by which the owner extended the sanctity to this animal. That's a little counterintuitive, right? When I first consecrated the white sheep, I just said so. I made it holy because I consecrated it by saying I'm going to bring it as an offering. I made that up. When I attempted to substitute the black sheep for the white sheep, now the black sheep is deriving its sacred status from an other animal that was already consecrated. So it's actually stronger. It has my words plus this animal that was already consecrated. Marzutra asks, but there is the case of the Pesach, as it does not require semicha or wine libations to accompany the offering or waving of the breast and thigh, while its remainder, what is the remainder of a Pesach? The remainder of a Pesach means, remember that a Pesach is a lamb or a goat in its first year. I think it has to be male. That is slaughtered on the afternoon before Pesach, Passover, when the temple is standing, and it has to be in its first year. So if it wasn't brought on Pesach, it was designated to be a Pesach, but for whatever reason we didn't make the trip to Jerusalem, so we weren't able to bring it as a Pesach, and then its first year passes. Does it just return to the herd? No. It becomes a peace offering. That's the remainder of a Pesach, is it automatically becomes a peace offering. It is no longer a Pesach, it's a Pesach offering that aged out. Right? And now it becomes a peace offering. Or, if I decide to bring it as an offering, it was designated to be a Pesach, so if I change my mind and just decide to bring it as an offering on any other day of the year, it becomes a peace offering. Okay? So there is the case of the Pesach, as it does not require placing hands on its head or wine libations that accompany it or waving of the breast and thigh. But its remainder, a peace offering, does require semicha, placing hands on its head, and wine libations to accompany the offering, and waving of the breast and thigh. So it didn't need those things when it was a Pesach, but it then does need those things when it got converted into a peace offering, which you would think is an offering of lesser sanctity with fewer requirements other than these accompanying things than the Pesach. Right? It can be brought anytime. The Pesach has to be brought on the one time. So what's going on? And the Pesach has to be in its first year, and the peace offering doesn't. So the Pesach has stringencies that the other one doesn't. So the Gemara answers, a Pesach on the rest of the days of the year is the same as a peace offering, and the animal is no longer considered a Pesach. Since it is a peace offering, all the laws of peace offering apply to it, and the fact that it was once designated as a Pesach becomes irrelevant. The conclusion of the Gemara is that there are no cases where a secondary status is actually more stringent than the accompanying primary status. Therefore, the derivation from the law of a sin offering to the law of a burnt offering, that the latter should be disqualified if it was not slaughtered in the north or its blood was not collected in the north, remains. And if you wish, say there is a different proof even after the fact. A burnt offering that was not slaughtered in the north is disqualified. The verse states, and slaughter the sin offering in the place of the burnt offering. Since the earlier verse already stated, in the place of the burnt offering, the repetition in this verse stresses that it shall be in its place, meaning that the offering is disqualified if it is slaughtered anywhere else. That's a lot simpler derivation. We could have started there, but then we would have missed out on the fun of following and tracing through all these possibilities that were discredited until we arrived at a proof that works. New topic. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive that a guilt offering, which is an offering of the most sacred order, like the sin offering, requires slaughter in the north? And the Gemara answers, as it is written, in the place where they slaughter the burnt offering, they shall slaughter the guilt offering, and its blood shall be sprinkled around the altar. Since the burnt offering must be slaughtered in the north, as we have learned, the guilt offering must also be slaughtered in the north. Okay, we have found the source that the slaughter must be in the north. From where do we derive that the collection of the blood of a guilt offering must also be in the north? Verse states, and its blood shall be sprinkled around the altar. Since the blood must be collected immediately after the slaughter and before the sprinkling, just as the slaughter must be in the north, so the collection of its blood must also be in the north. From where do we derive that the one who collects the blood must himself stand in the north? The verse does not only state its blood shall be sprinkled, but it also states, and its blood shall be sprinkled, and the conjunction and, in this case, vs, serves to include the one who collects the blood. We have found the verse teaching that in order to perform the mitzvah in its optimal manner, the slaughtering of the guilt offering is in the north. From where do we derive to disqualify after the fact an offering slaughtered elsewhere? The Gemara answers, well, in other verses written, referring to the guilt offering, which states, and he shall slaughter the sheep in the place where they slaughter the sin offering and the burnt offering in the place of the sanctuary. For as the sin offering, so is the guilt offering. To the priest, it is most holy. Leviticus 14:13. And this teaches that all guilt offerings are disqualified if they are not slaughtered in the north. But, says the Gemara, does this verse come to teach this law? This verse is necessary for that which is taught in a baraisa, with regard to a matter that was included in a general category, but left that category to discuss a new matter, i.e., if a novel aspect or special ruling is taught with regard to a specific case that is within a broader general category, then you may not return it to its general category. In other words, if you say that all sin offerings are slaughtered in this place, and then you say there is the sin offering of a king, which has special requirements, then, since you've now isolated the sin offering of a king and said that it has special requirements, maybe we can't return it to the general category of sin offerings that must be slaughtered in that particular place. Since the sin offering is different and that has these particular requirements, if it's the sin offering of a king, maybe it has particular requirements with respect to the place of slaughter as well. You may not return it to its general category, even for other matters, and this case is understood to have been entirely removed from the general category, unless the verse explicitly returns it to its general category. So the Gemara explains. How so? The verse states, quote, and he shall slaughter the sheep in the place where they slaughter the sin offering and the burnt offering, in the place of the sanctuary, for as the sin offering, so is the guilt offering. To the priest it is most holy. As there is no need for the verse to state, as the sin offering, so is the guilt offering, since the verse had already equated the guilt offering with the sin offering, why does the verse state, as the sin offering, so is the guilt offering? What does this second comparison serve to teach? Since the guilt offering of a mitzora, the one afflicted with that skin condition, left the general category of guilt offerings to teach a new matter. What was the new matter? There is the law that is unique to, among all guilt offerings, there's something unique about the guilt offering of a mitzora, right, who is completing his purification after healing from tsaras, and then he brings a group of offerings, and one of them is the guilt offering of a mitzora. And it is unique in that the blood of that offering is placed on the right thumb of his hand and the right big toe of the foot and on the right ear of the mitzora. Other guilt offerings, we don't do that. Therefore, one might have thought that this guilt offering does not require placement of blood or burning of the sacrificial portions on the altar, as the laws of this guilt offering are unique within the world of guilt offerings. To counter this reasoning, the verse in the Torah states, as the sin offering, so is the guilt offering, right? So it's returning the guilt offering and saying, other than the fact that from the blood of the guilt offering, the mitzora, we have to put some of it on his body, ear, thumb, and toe. Other than that unique aspect, the guilt offering of the mitzora is the same as all other guilt offerings. That would imply slaughtering the north, collecting the blood in the north, etc. Just as the sin offering requires the placement of blood and the burning of the sacrificial portions on the altar, so too the guilt offering of the mitzora requires placement of the blood and the burning of sacrificial portions on the altar. And similarly, just as the verse had to teach these two laws, so too the verse had to state, and he shall slaughter the sheep in the place where they slaughter the sin offering and the burnt offering, to teach that it requires slaughter in the north. It cannot serve as a source for the general law that a guilt offering slaughtered in a place other than the north is disqualified. We haven't proven that yet. So the Gemara explains, well, if that's true, that the optimal manner to perform the mitzvah is to slaughter the guilt offering in the north, but failure to do so does not disqualify it. If that were true, let the Torah write the requirement to slaughter it in the north, in this context, i.e. in the context of the guilt offering of a mitzora, and not write it in that context, i.e. that of the standard guilt offering. The requirement for slaughter in the north for all other guilt offerings could then be derived from the guilt offering of the mitzora. Instead, the repetition of the requirement to slaughter in the north serves to disqualify a guilt offering whose slaughter is not in the north. The Gemara comments, okay, well, this works out well if we hold that with regard to a matter that left its category to teach a new matter, the following principle applies. The matter itself does not learn laws from the general category until the Torah explicitly returns this specific exception back to the general category. If you believe in that principle, what we've done so far works. But not everybody holds by that principle. Now we're on page 49b. But other matters in its general category learn laws from it. In this case, with regard to the law of slaughtering a guilt offering in the north, it is, okay, so what I just said. Although some of the laws of the guilt offering of a mitzora do not apply to the category of guilt offerings in general, it can still serve as the source for the law that any guilt offering is disqualified if it is not slaughtered in the north. But if we hold that in the case of a matter that left its category to teach a new matter, the original matter, does not learn laws from the general category, and its general category does not learn laws from it, then this verse would be necessary to teach its own halacha. And so, right, if we're using that principle in a different way, then the derivation we've done so far won't work. So then what do? The Gemara answers, once the verse returned the law of the guilt offering of a mitzora to the general category by stating, as the sin offering, so is the guilt offering, it returned it completely. Therefore, when the verse states that it requires slaughter in the north of the temple courtyard, the phrase is not needed to teach the law about the guilt offering of a mitzora, and now it can be used to teach the law about guilt offerings in general, that like a sin offering, not only is it supposed to be slaughtered in the north, but if you don't slaughter in the north, the offering is disqualified. Mar Zutra, the son of Rav Mari, said to Ravina, say that when the verse returned the guilt offering of a mitzora to the class of standard guilt offerings, that is only with regard to placement of the blood on the altar and burning the sacrificial portions, which require priesthood, i.e. only a priest may perform them. As the verse states, for as the sin offering, so is the guilt offering to the priest. But say that slaughter, which does not require priesthood, as even a non-priest may slaughter an offering, does not require that it be done in the north of the temple courtyard. Ravina answered him, if so, let the verse state, for as the sin offering, so is it. What is added by the expanded phrase, for as the sin offering, so is the guilt offering? It teaches that the guilt offering of a mitzora will be like the rest of the guilt offerings. New topic. The Gemara asks, why do I need to juxtapose the guilt offering of a mitzora to a sin offering to teach the law that it must be slaughtered in the north? And why do I need to juxtapose it to a burnt offering to teach the same law? The verse states, and he shall slaughter the sheep in the place where they slaughter the sin offering and the burnt offering, in the place of the sanctuary. Why does the Torah specify that the guilt offering is going to be slaughtered in the north by comparing it to both the sin offering and the burnt offering? Ravina said it was necessary to juxtapose the guilt offering to both the sin offering and the burnt offering in separate verses, as if the verse had juxtaposed the guilt offering only to a sin offering, but had not juxtaposed it to a burnt offering, I would say, from where is the requirement to slaughter a sin offering in the north derived? It is from the law of the burnt offering, as we explained on page 48a. I would then assume that a matter derived via a juxtaposition, i.e. the law of a sin offering, which was derived via a juxtaposition to the law of the burnt offering, then teaches that law to another case via a juxtaposition. But there is a principle that with regard to matters of consecration, the law may not be derived via a juxtaposition from another law that was itself derived via a juxtaposition. To prevent this incorrect assumption, the verse had to specifically teach the juxtaposition to a burnt offering. Right? So A is next to B is next to C. B learns something out from A. Can you then extend that lesson to C? After all, C is next to B. Answer no, because you can only use a juxtaposition once. So if we learn something about B from A, the fact that it now applies to B, we can't then extend it to C just because C is next to B. So to derive that same law would apply to C, we would need that later on, A and C are themselves juxtaposed. Mar Zutra, the son of Rab Mari, said to Ravina, but let the verse juxtapose the guilt offering of a mitzvah only to a burnt offering and not juxtapose it to a sin offering. The juxtaposition to a sin offering would then appear superfluous, or appear superfluous to him. Ravina answered, if that had been so, I would still say that a matter derived via a juxtaposition teaches a law via a juxtaposition. And if you would say that if that were to be so, let the verse juxtapose the guilt offering of a mitzvah only to a sin offering, one could answer that it is preferable for the Torah that it juxtaposes the guilt offering to the primary offering about which it states that it must be slaughtered in the north, i.e. the burnt offering, and not juxtapose it to something that derives its requirement to be slaughtered in the north from the burnt offering, i.e. the sin offering. For this reason, i.e. to prevent the incorrect assumption that a matter derived via a juxtaposition then teaches its law via a juxtaposition, the verse juxtaposed it to a sin offering and also juxtaposed it to a burnt offering, to say that a matter derived via a juxtaposition does not then teach its law via juxtaposition, right? How do we know that the fact that B learns something about B that was not stated explicit in the Torah, we can learn it out from A because the law of A and B were one after another in the verses of the Torah, right? And then the C is right next to B, right? And we could learn the same matter since now we know about B that has to be slaughtered in the north because A is slaughtered in the north and C is next to B. So how do we know that we can't just extend the requirement to slaughter in the north from B to C? We know that because C is juxtaposed to A further down in the Torah. Now they're directly juxtaposed to teach us that we can't go from A to B and B to C. Rava says the principle that a matter derived via a juxtaposition cannot then teach its law via a juxtaposition is derived from here, as it is written with regard to the sin offering brought by the high priest, and the 2 kidneys and the fat that is upon them, which is by the loins, and the diaphragm with the liver, which he shall take away by the kidneys, as it is taken off from the ox of the sacrifice of peace offerings, and the priest shall make them smoke upon the altar of burnt offering. Leviticus 4, verses 9 and 10. And one can ask, for what law is this offering juxtaposed to that of a peace offering? If it is to teach that the priest must sacrifice the diaphragm with the liver and the 2 kidneys from the offering, that is written with regard to the offering itself in the previous verse. This does not need to be derived via a juxtaposition. Therefore, it is written due to the fact that the verse wants to teach the law of the diaphragm with the liver and the 2 kidneys, deriving it from the law of the offering of the bull for an unwitting communal sin, and then teaching it to apply to the law of the goats brought as sin offerings for communal idol worship. It is not written explicitly in the passage discussing the bull for an unwitting communal sin itself, and it is derived from the law of the bull for an unwitting sin of an anointed priest. The offering for an unwitting communal sin is therefore juxtaposed to the sin offering brought by the high priest in the verse, so shall he do with the bull, as he did with the bull of the sin offering, so shall he do with this. And for this reason, it was necessary for the verse to state, as it is taken off from the ox, so that it is as though the Torah wrote explicitly in the passage discussing the bull for an unwitting communal sin itself. Further explanation. One of the hermeneutical principles applied to understanding verses in the Torah is, if the law that is stated is not required for the matter in which it is written, because we've already learned it somewhere else, then it's there not just to be redundant, it's there for a different reason. It is there to teach this aspect about some other kind of offering or some other context in which that law was not stated. Right? If the law is not required for the matter in which it is written, apply it to another matter. When this principle is employed, the law written in one context is viewed as if it were written elsewhere. In this case, as it was not necessary for the verse to write the juxtaposition to a peace offering in the context of the sin offering brought by the high priest, it is applied to the case of the bull for an unwitting communal sin. And therefore, it will not be a case of a matter derived via a juxtaposition that then teaches its law via a juxtaposition. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. Now, I think we can, at this point, we're getting a little bit more supple with these laws and how they're derived one from the other. And so we can understand that what was God doing, writing, dictating laws to Moses for our behalf, where there are different kinds of offerings and all the details of each kind of offering are not listed, right? And you need them. Like, you need to know where a certain kind of offering is going to be slaughtered. You need to know by whom a certain kind of offering will be slaughtered. You need to know who is going to collect the blood and who is going to convey the blood. Like, there are details that are necessary. We need to know what the details are for the whole process of every kind of offering. Since the Torah omits doesn't list all the specific instructions for every kind of offering, but rather offers some specifics in this offering, some of the specifics of that offering, and some of the specifics of this offering, right? So then we have to know, okay, we're going to need a list of all the specifics for every offering. So in the blanks, how are we going to fill in the blanks? Are we going to say, which specific requirements of each offering are we going to borrow from a similar offering? And by what principle are we going to decide whether we extend laws of slaughter from the burnt offering to the sin offering, whether we extend laws of placement of the blood from the guilt offering to the sin offering, whether we extend requirements of the manner of shechting, the place of shechting, the time of shechting, the intentionality of the shechting, from a peace offering or from a sin offering over to a burnt offering or to a guilt offering? By what principle are we going to know whether to extend those elements or not? Well, the sages spend hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years, working out when you can extend a law and when not, right? And so we can see that it was all by design. God wrote the Torah in such a way that if these laws were going to be fulfilled and fulfilled properly and with full intentionality and correctness, it would require this kind of deep study. It wasn't that God was sloppy and left out details. It was that God said, I'm going to give you the Torah, and part of receiving the Torah is working, studying, toiling in your understanding of the Torah. And the fact that they did this for hundreds and hundreds of years while the temples stood, and still some of these details had not been worked out. I mean, they had a working method. They just taught one, the older priest to the next priest, etc. But we know that some of these laws weren't derived until the sages derived them hundreds of years after the temple fell, because they didn't have all these hermeneutical principles in place during the first or second temple period. It's just the way that this whole system was bequeathed by God to us, right? And there are laws now that have been added on the books that didn't exist 2,000 years ago. I mean, if for no other reason that they didn't face, what if we have life support systems that can keep a person alive after his brain is dead? Like, they didn't have that in ancient times. Now we do. And there's laws in place for it, right? And it's just this idea of figuring out what God's will is in every situation is something that is left to our sages in every generation. Okay. Did I say that? Right. So I'm almost done. Rav Papa said to Rava, but why not let the Torah write explicitly in the passage discussing the bull of an unwitting communal sin itself, that the diaphragm with the liver and the two kidneys must be removed from the ox, and not juxtapose it to a peace offering in this convoluted manner, right? Saying exactly that. why didn't God just give the specifics? And Rava answered, if the Torah had written it in that passage itself and not juxtaposed it, I would say that in general a matter derived via a juxtaposition then teaches via a juxtaposition, as one would not have this instance to serve as a counterexample of that principle. And if you would say, well, if so, why not simply juxtapose the case of the bull for an unwitting communal sin to the case of the bull of the anointed priest? I would answer, it is preferable for the verse it is preferable for the verse that it writes it in the passage itself rather than to juxtapose it alone. It is for this reason that it wrote it and juxtaposed it, to say that a matter derived via a juxtaposition cannot then teach its law via a juxtaposition, a principle that we need to know in order to know, well, if we can't go from juxtaposition to juxtaposition, we can't extend the law from A to B and then from B to C just because there are 3 consecutive verses in the Torah or 3 consecutive teachings in the Torah. Then we're going to have to learn out those elements about C from somewhere else. And if we didn't have this counterexample to teach us that principle, we wouldn't know that principle. Okay. That is where we'll stop. I'm going to take a couple questions. But reminder, we don't have class tomorrow, Friday, because you and I are traveling. The next class will be on Monday. Monday is our next class, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Okay. Thursdayheim, that's a new name. Welcome, Thursday. Asks, why do you sing out certain phrases? I will tell you. First of all, I didn't make that up. I learned that, from the rabbis and great Talmudists. They're all rabbis that I learned from. This is an established way of teaching. The reason that you sing a phrase like this is because we're talking about long sentences, right? Where you're not sure when I've reached the end of a matter and its 3 proofs, and therefore, because of this matter and its 3 proofs, I can extend this teaching to a different matter. And by singing in this way, I'm signaling that it's not that this is a matter and it's proof and now I'm moving on to a new matter. Rather, this is 3 things that all come as a unit and now I can move on. That's what the singing just teaches you, where a concept begins and ends, so that when I come, there's a natural resolution to a whole idea and now moving on to the next. I hope that's clear. Like for instance, Bill's now going to ask a question. He says, I'm noticing that the Pesach is actually fairly generous in terms of stringencies. In terms of its stringencies, it's more generous. I'm noticing that the Pesach, the Passover offering, is actually fairly generous in terms of its stringencies compared to other sacrifices. Most likely, as in the case of the allowances at the Pesach, need not be sacrificed in the north. Most of these seem practical, where... the singing doesn't work for this question. Let me go back. What is Bill asking? I'm noticing that the Pesach is actually fairly generous in terms of its stringencies than other sacrifices. I think you're saying is more generous compared to other sacrifices. Most likely, as in the case of the allowances that the Pesach need not be sacrificed in the north, most of these seem practical, where the sheer number of Pesach offerings at the same time of year would have made stringency unworkable. So I think Bill is saying, is the reason that the Pesach doesn't need to be slaughtered in the north because, practically speaking, on the afternoon before Pesach, thousands of these offerings had to be brought together. Or, right, so that's the whole concept. Or is it that the Pesach is more lenient compared to these other offerings that have to be slaughtered in the north, not because of the practical matter that so many of them had to be slaughtered on that same day, but rather that the Pesach is an offering of a lesser sacred status than the sin offering and the guilt offering? And the answer is yes, I think it's both. right? Because the Pesach doesn't atone like the sin offering. It is not consumed on the altar entirely like the burnt offering. It is eaten by its owners, unlike the sin offering and the burnt offering and the guilt offering, right? So there's both that aspect of, as a practical matter, wouldn't make sense, and it's an offering of a lesser sacred status. However, we did learn at the beginning of this tractate that the Pesach and the sin offering are unique in that if at the time that they are slaughtered, somebody has in mind that he thinks he's slaughtering a different kind of offering, then it is entirely disqualified and it doesn't complete its journey to the altar at all. It's just ended and we don't sprinkle the blood, etc. And then Bill says a non-germane question. For those of us who like having physical media, when, if ever, can we expect Guns N' Moses to hit DVD? I have an answer to your question that was just reached. I don't have an exact date, but originally we were not gonna have a Blu-ray or DVD of Guns N' Moses because, like so many people, that used to be a $25 billion business, the DVD business. Now it's a $1 billion business because most people, stream and don't have DVD players, don't have Blu-ray players, and don't want it. That's why that business cratered. But even though it lost, 95% of its value, whatever 25 to down to 1 is, $1 billion is still a real business. And you are not the only person who has said, I want a physical copy of Guns N' Moses. And so we've been talking to some players in this industry, and it looks like pretty certain it's happening. I mean, the company that's going to bring out the DVD said we're going to do it, and they're just delivering a term sheet to us. But I know they want to do it, and so once we do that, we'll have to create it. We have to author the disc, special features. Nina and I will do a writer and director commentary like we did on our first films. The Blu-ray and DVD of Saving Lincoln and When Do We Eat. We do the commentary together. I would like to do that again with Nina. And other special features. So, it takes time to author all those things, get it into the right format, get it off to the company, that they then make the master disc, author the master disc, then the duplication, and then it becomes available for sale. So it's going to take a couple months, 2 to 3 months, but it's going to happen with God's help. So that's the answer to that. Okay, that's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, see you on Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.